Mic? Oh, no, I have a mic.
You
Hey.
have it.
What's up? How are you?
No
Let's see it.
problem. Okay, so basically we're here today. I don't know the context, if you know all the context. The idea is that we have a lot of startups in WIDA 7 that are going to pitch to some investors. And so we thought it was really cool that we had you with us today because you are, at the end of the day, a huge inspiration for a lot of startups in terms of the success that you've been able to attain. So my first question to you was, a lot of times it seems that great entrepreneurs have tried the same idea various times. So I remember when I was at the Dublin Web Summit, Jack Dorsey said Twitter, he had earlier variations of the same idea in 2000, Nicholas Zenstrom with Kazaa to Skype, and then you with Dodgeball. So maybe to kind of get everyone situated, if you can tell us a little bit about Dodgeball and the evolution to Foursquare and your overall vision of social networking services based on location and the mobile.
Yeah, I guess, the first thing is, it's really the first sentence that you said about like, oh, your success is such an inspiration, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I don't think we've been successful yet. Like, I think we're on our way to building some stuff that's pretty great. And a lot of people look at like the Foursquare story, and we're almost 4 years old, as like this big hockey stick, which it's really kind of fun to look at. But before that, I mean, we've been working on this stuff for like 10 years, and so it's really been like 6 or 7 years of failure, and now we're just starting to see the stuff work. All right, so it's like it's been a very long, kind of difficult road, and it's always funny because people only remember like the good parts, like, oh, you guys are doing great, you're killing it, and it's like, man, we struggled through this for a while, right? I had a company before this called Dodgeball, which we sold to Google, and we were really excited about the future of mobile and social and local, and it was like, we can bring this to Google and we can blow it up and make it huge, and like it just didn't work out. We just couldn't get the things accomplished there, and so like Dodgeball ended up going away. We ended up leaving. I didn't have a job for a year. Like I had a hard time getting a job before we started Foursquare again. And then even before we ended up bringing Dodgeball to Google, like I had worked on this stuff a couple other times, and like it never got traction. I always thought there was something really interesting behind like everything we're doing with mobile and social and location, but sometimes it was just a little bit too early, or like we brought it to Google, we couldn't get them super excited about it, and it's just been it's been a really like long road with a whole bunch of different ups and downs, and it's right like now we happen to be having a really good run with it.
So, I mean, following that line, what would you think are the most important pivots that you've made? Because you started out, I guess, being famous for the check-ins. Now you have the Explore function, which seems more like a search play. So what are the most important pivots? Why did you do them? What have you learned?
Pivot is my least favorite word. It's like a dirty word. Because I never see what we're doing as a pivot. Because like if we went back in time, even back to the Dodgeball days, like we knew that the check-in stuff was super interesting. Like on its own, like the fact that I just checked in here is not interesting. But the fact that maybe like 30 or 50 people here checked in, like that's really good signal. And you get someone and you get them to check in 20 times over the course of 20 days, like you get a good sense of like where they spend time, what they like to do in the mornings, in the afternoon, what type of places do they like. And we have 3 billion of these check-ins now. And so we can do all sorts of stuff. Like you give me a latitude and longitude, and I can tell you where the crowd is going to be 15 minutes from now. Like we can like predict the future in a sense. It's really, really cool data. And we knew this stuff was going to be really valuable back in the Dodgeball days, back in the Google days, and that's really why, like when Dodgeball fell apart and it shut down, like we knew we had to try it again, because we knew the check-in data was valuable. We knew we had to try to tell the story again. We knew we had to build a machine that would basically get all this check-in data, and that's what Foursquare is. Foursquare is a machine that generates check-ins, and it does it because of specials, and it does it with game mechanics and points and badges and mayorships. But now, 4 years later, we've got 3 billion check-ins, and we can just do stuff that other companies can't do. So I never think of it as a pivot. It was kind of like the master plan all along. But I'll tell you, like I've been coming to Mobile World Congress. You guys who's going to the conference, right? You guys all go there? Yeah, we came 3 years ago, and we'd sit down with like the handset manufacturers and the operators, and they would say, Foursquare, yeah, kind of heard of it. What is it? And then last year, they're like, oh yeah, we heard of you guys. You're that check-in service. And now, like, they all get what we're doing with the data. We've made so much noise about 3 billion check-ins and what we can do with personalized local search and discovery that they're like, like they take us really seriously now. They're like, you guys have amazing data. We really want to work with you. And we even last year was a lot harder for us. And now it's like it's easier to tell the story and people start to get it. So it's been really rewarding to see that happen even just over the last year or so.
Well, I guess that last point touches on something, which is usually that people ignore you until you have enough users to be relevant. And I guess for startups, the most difficult thing is actually getting users. So how did you get, I think right now you have 30 million users, right?
Yeah, just over 30 million users. I don't know, it was really hard. I tell you, it's just for us, it was never about building never really about building a business or just running a company. It was always just building stuff that our friends wanted to use. That's how Dodgeball started. That's why we resurrected it with Foursquare. It's like we just wanted to build stuff that our friends were using in New York. Like, can we build this stuff that's going to help me find a better brunch than the one that I go to all the time in my neighborhood? And we built stuff for us, and we just kept tweaking it and trying to make it a little bit better and a little bit faster and a little bit cooler and a little bit cuter. And eventually, you end up building stuff that you like, and it turns out that when you build stuff that you like, your friends usually like it too. And if your friends like it, their friends like it as well. And so as long as you just keep building the stuff that's making you happy and making your friends happy, that's how it happened for us. We had no strategy. We had no our customer acquisition strategy to get from 10 million, from 10 users to 30,000 users is going to be this. It just happened. And then one day you look back and wow, we have 100,000 users. That's crazy. And then 4 years later, you just said 30 million. I haven't really thought about it. I was like, man, that's a lot of users. It had this little moment of reflection on it. But yeah, I think that's it. Just focusing on the little parts of the product that bring surprise and delight and joy and utility to people. And if you get those things right, I think it naturally just kind of comes together.
And how did you go from creating things that you would like to use or your friends would like to use to opening it up to developers? Because now you have more than 30,000 developers that are building off your API, right? So how does that fit into the strategy?
Yeah, what it was is we were really inspired by by what Twitter was able to do at their API early on. And remember, if you go back, back in time, Twitter was just a website, and they didn't have time to build mobile apps, so people built the mobile apps for them on top of the API. Remember, there was there's TweetDeck and Twitterific, and there's probably Tweety, all those apps that now they're owned by Twitter. And that was for us. We built the iPhone app, and people were like, "Where's the Android app?" And I'm like, I don't know. It's just me and Naveen working on this. There's only two of us. How about we'll just instead of building an Android app, we'll make an API and we'll cross our fingers and maybe someone will make one for us. And then someone made an Android app, and someone made another one, and someone made a BlackBerry app, and then someone made a dating app on top of it, and someone did some map visualizations. And then it just kind of blew up. And now it's, now you've got everyone from Instagram to Vine to Path to Uber, all of them using our data set to power all these mobile location apps. And it's just, it puts it's a real strategic asset to the company. Something that just started off as, if we make the API, maybe people will do some of the work for us. It makes our day-to-day a little bit easier. And now it's blown up into something that's been a real strategic asset.
And I guess that once you start having so much success, you get competitors and some big ones. So my next question is, one of the most feared questions I think that internet startups usually have is, and what happens if Google or Facebook decide to do something similar? Well, I guess you actually had that become a reality. How did you feel when you found out they were going to create products that would compete with what you're doing? How did you respond to them? How do you meet them?
I'll tell you, I would be lying if I told you that we were not, even I personally was not scared of what's going to happen when Facebook got into the space. This is back in 2010. And I remember very clearly having a moment at the company where this is just when we started blowing up. We had Yelp ripping us off, oh, Yelp's now going to have check-ins, and instead of mayors, they have their dukes. And I'm like, really? And then Latitude added to check-in, and then Facebook Places came along, and there's the whole thing. It's what is it? Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Did I get that right? I might have just totally butchered the quote. Anyway, but and then people tell you that oh, that's a good thing if they're copying. I'm like, it's not a good thing. It's driving me crazy. But yeah, we were really worried about it. But the thing that we have is these are our ideas, and this is the stuff that we're most passionate about building. And we've done it so well that other people are like, that is a good idea. Let's copy that. But they're kind of copying what we've done, not understanding where we're going or what we're trying to do. And the best advice I can give people that find themselves in that position is you can't get distracted by people by people copying you or by people being inspired by you, if you want to call it by a nicer term. You have to just be okay, well, this is where we're going to be, or we're going to keep building the stuff that we said we're going to build. I'm not going to get distracted by what Yelp does, or by what Gowalla does, or by what Facebook does, or by the 10 other startups that are starting to nip at us a little bit. Just keep focused on the things that we are most passionate about and where we think the future is. And that's always worked for us. In the past, we've definitely been guilty of oh my God, God, these guys are doing something. Maybe we should do that too. And anytime you go down that, you get distracted and you lose your guidance. Like you kind of lose your direction. So you just got to keep focused on what your roadmap is and stick to your stuff, right? And if people want to follow you, so be it. But like, you have to be leading for them to follow you.
And how important is it to have a good relationship with them? I mean, I think it was the guy from Yelp said something about like, oh, Foursquare is blah, blah, blah. And you said, haters are going to hate. I can't wait to prove you guys all wrong.
Yeah.
And it's got tweeted about. So kind of how important is it to maintain a good relationship with your competitors?
I don't know if I'd call that a good relationship with the competitors. I was just like, I hate people talking trash about us. And, it's like, listen, if you want to talk trash, like, we'll talk trash a little bit back. But, we've been friendly with all these guys. Like, everyone makes it out as like, oh, my God, you must see the Facebook people on the street and get so mad at them. I'm like, no, like, we're all, like, hustling to try to build a different version of the future that we've imagined. And, like, I have an incredible amount of respect for those guys. Like, we know they have respect for us. And a lot of times, like, we stay really close with these guys. People have made it out, like, even in the past, like 2010, when we were competing neck and neck with Gowalla. And I know JW from Gowalla just wrote an interesting post on this. Hold on, my phone is buzzing. People made it out as like we were these enemies. I'm like, no, like we're both entrepreneurs, like struggling through the highs and lows and hustling to try to make the thing. And like that's the thing that we have in common. And sure, we end up on panels together, and we used to kind of butt heads at South by Southwest or not. But you end up being friendly with these folks. And our approach all along has been just don't be a hater. Like help to give back to the startup ecosystem, like help other entrepreneurs through this process. Like, so what if we end up competing with them? It's like, what's, more people working together and contributing to the ecosystem, and like, people building on top of our stuff and us building on top of other people's stuff. Like, it just, I don't know, it pushes everything forward a little bit faster.
Okay. And now going to the other side, the evil side, the investors. To date,
they don't have to be evil. They let you, they let you build the stuff you dream about building. Anyway.
Well, today you've raised more than $70 million, right? And your company was valued at, what, $600 million, I think I read in TechCrunch. And you've gotten like a lot of really cool investors on board: Jack Dorsey, Kevin Rose, Ron Conway, Andreessen Horowitz, Union Square, et cetera.
Yep.
So how hard was it to get like the first investor, and how did you then convince all these other really cool investors to join?
Yeah, we were just talking about this in the cab ride over, because it goes back to the whole like, oh, Foursquare, you guys are such a huge, you were a runaway success from the day that you started. I'm like, no, well, we weren't. Like, it took me 6 months to raise our first round. I got like 32 no's from people, like investors being like, hey, that's a really good idea, but I'm not going to invest in it. Like you tried this with Dodgeball, it didn't work. Why are you doing it again? And it's just like we hustled like holy hell to get that first round of funding raised. And you know what it was? It was just someone from Union Square Ventures back in the day wrote a blog post about this back in 2009. And they wrote a blog post about, I've seen the future of Yelp, and it's called Foursquare. And then once that person wrote that article and very clearly articulated why, this is someone at a venture firm, Charlie O'Donnell, wrote this post, it kind of made the way around on the blogs. And, I remember Fred Wilson ended up like, commenting on it or something. And then once there was like affirmation from one of the VCs, and everyone's like, oh, well, if they think it's a good idea, we think it's a good idea too. And just like that, like overnight it switched from us calling people like, please, you sure you don't want to give us money, to like not being able to answer the phone just because like people were just cold calling us trying to get in on the fundraising. So it really, really can change very quickly. And none of it was easy for us. Even when we had people calling us all the time, after things got really exciting for us, it was very difficult for us to figure out like, who are the people that really got it and who are the people that were just followers, that got excited because someone else got excited, and now it's tricky. But I think one of the things that we've done very well is we've been very patient and methodical about raising money, and we have very good investors. We have very top tier investors: Andreessen Horowitz, Spark, OATV. Did I say AH? It's like when you get really top quality investors, like they've seen everything. They've seen good startups, they've seen bad startups, they've seen good days, they've seen bad days, and like they're very like kind of zen about like the process that you go through. So I'm sure a bunch of you guys here have startups. Like that every single day, it's like everyone says it's like a roller coaster, but it's actually like roller coasters inside of a roller coaster. Like you have amazing mornings and you have awful lunch meetings, and then you have a great coffee meeting, and then by the end of the day you just want to like quit. And to have people on our board that have gone through this before and that understand that the process of doing a startup like makes you crazy and it's part of the job. know, it makes it a lot easier. And so these guys haven't, they've seen what happened on the inside of Facebook, they've seen what happened on the inside of Twitter, they've seen it on Tumblr, and they can give us advice on, okay, listen, what you guys are going through, other companies have done it, this is how they got through it, and it's great to have them on our side.
And I mean, one thing that Spanish or European startups always complain about is that investors here usually want to see a proven business model. And then we're always jealous that maybe in other countries, proven business models aren't 100% required. And then there was the article in the New York Times about a month ago saying that after the Facebook IPO and the situations with Zynga and Groupon, that basically investors have become a lot more conservative. How do you see the ecosystem right now for investments in the US, and how important is it to you to have a proven business model?
Yeah, we were talking about this too. In the U.S., it seems like it's I don't want to say it's not drying up, but it's a little bit harder, I think, to get a seed money or a Series A than it used to be, maybe a year ago or 2 years ago. And I think that there's a lot of different factors here. People say, oh, everyone's focusing on enterprise, or the Facebook Groupon, Zynga, performance. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different reasons, but in general, it's just things go in cycles. And in 2009, we were in the very beginning of the cycle, and it took us 6 months to get anyone to give us even a little bit of money. And a year ago, you could make a couple phone calls, and it was very easy to go and raise like a Series A. And now I think it's getting a little bit more difficult. And I bet if you go 2 or 3 years out, it's going to be a lot easier again. So those things just kind of go in cycles, and you have to time it. In terms of the proven, proven business model or revenue model, we didn't have a proven model. The thing that really I think got Union Square Ventures excited initially was that we were able to show that users liked checking in at places, and then the places liked the fact that users were checking in. And there was like a little back and forth. Like, oh, you check in, you get something for free. And then they encourage people to check in, and more people would check in. Like, it was this little wheel that just kept turning. And when they saw both sides of it, they're like, okay, now this is interesting. When it was just a check-in service, it wasn't interesting to people. But it was like, hey, the merchants are into it too? Okay, that's two things working together. That's really interesting. And I think really, if you can, if you have a product that people are getting excited about, you should be able to, you can go out and you can spin that into, a story, like whether it's around like monetizing through advertising or partnerships or other things. But like once you have a product that people love, like I think it's easier to sit back and figure out how you might be able to monetize some of those things. Like it's easy for us because we have both sides of that equation. We have like the users dig it, they love getting deals. The data goes to the merchants see who their best customers are, and they like to offer the deal. So that, it's very easy to see how we're going to monetize, and we started doing that stuff already. But I think as long as you can start to see that you're growing, you can show a little bit of an audience, you can tell a story around some of that.
Okay, and this is coming to my last questions. What's next for Foursquare? Where do you see Foursquare in 5 years?
5 years is tough, right? 5 years is tough because like you think about like how much has changed just in the last couple of years. Like the iPhone came out like 5 years ago, right? So what are we going to be doing 5 years from now? Are we all wearing like crazy future glasses? Like it's difficult to imagine how some of that stuff will look. Anyway, I think look how far we came in the last even just 2 years, from just being like known as the check-in service with badges to now being personalized local search. Like we do personalized local search better than anyone else, and people like get that. Like 3 billion data points, like that's hard to get. I think the best version of Foursquare that we can build is the one that you don't even have to think about using. It's the one that like sits in your pocket or in your backpack or your purse, and it just kind of listens to what's going on. Like what's going on in this room, what's going on across the street, how well do you know this city, how well do you know this neighborhood or friends around the corner. And it just kind of, it buzzes, it wakes up, it lets you know about the things that are interesting nearby. And this stuff is going to be really hard to build. And I'm not sure if we're going to be looking at the screens on our phone, I'm not sure if we're going to be looking at the screens on our watches, or maybe like the screens that are built into our crazy future goggles. But like that's where this stuff is going. Passive awareness of location, ambient awareness of things that are going around. It's like building like superpowers for people. Like let me see what's going on around that corner, and let me kind of let me kind of see through walls and stuff, because we can surface this data in really interesting ways. And I think that's the stuff, like that's the vision for what we're doing. That's why we got into this. And that's the thing that we want to build. And I don't think other companies are going to end up building that. I think that's our destiny as a company, is to build that stuff that's been in our head for a long time. And I think that's a lot different than like the than the big ideas behind Google and Facebook and some of these other services. And ultimately, I think that's why we're going to be successful. Like, we've got this thing that I really think if we pull it off, it's different than what everyone else is trying to do.
Okay, and my last question now is, now we're going to have our demo day. 7 startups are going to pitch to this audience of investors and other members of the ecosystem. What would be your top 3 tips for startups that are pitching, trying to get money? They're at the beginning of the process, not kind of in the middle as you are. What would your advice to them be?
On pitching, specifically pitching, I would say you got to be pretty clear. 3 things. Or you got to be pretty. I'm just making these up. You got to be you got to be pretty clear about what the product does. Like, someone sent me a pitch deck the other day, and I had to go through to get to slide 6 before I saw what the heck does this thing even do. I think up front you got to be like, this is the problem that we're trying to solve. This is the way that we're trying to solve it, and this is why we think it's an important problem. You got to get that across immediately, otherwise it gets lost. I think the second thing is you got to be passionate about what you're building. I meet with entrepreneurs a bunch, and people pitch me like, I'm doing this enterprise thing. It's going to be awesome. Like, really? Are you super excited about the enterprise app you're building? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, then why are you doing it? Like, you're signing yourself up to lose years and years, sleepless nights over this idea if it takes off. Like, it better be something that you really love. And you got to be passionate about it. And I think entrepreneurs, I think investors, they get that right away. They see pitches all day long, and they can tell are you just doing this because everyone else is doing it, or are you really psyched and passionate about this idea? And then the third thing is there's talk is cheap. You got to be able to build this stuff. I'm not an engineer by training. I'm actually awful. I wouldn't even call myself close to an engineer. I'm a guy that picked up a book on PHP 5 years ago, and I was like, I'm going to try to build something because I can't. I'm going to teach myself how to build this because I can't find anyone else to build it for me. And so, the reason that our stuff took off is because we built it. We didn't just sit and talk about it. We had really crappy prototypes that worked 50% of the time. And Dodgeball worked 80% of the time. 20% of the stuff just didn't work. But we built enough that actually you could demo it and you could show people, and that got people excited. And that's the big part of it. It's one thing to have to have a pitch that is 10 slides of what you want to do. It's another thing to be like, okay, listen, I'm going to show you the ugliest website that barely renders on a mobile screen, but you can kind of do this thing and you can kind of see how it's going to work if you imagine it a little bit. If you can just show just the bare minimum of it working, you can get people excited about it. And I think that's what, and that's ultimately one of the things that investors want to see. That you have the ideas and you can put them together, you can communicate, but also you can execute on it. You don't have to build the whole thing yourself, but you have to build just enough to get other people excited about it so that you can start building a team around it.
Okay. Well, that's it for me. And now is the time we're going to open it up to the audience. If you guys have a question, please raise your hand, and we're going to have one of the hostesses bring a mic.
What goes on behind the mirror up there?
That's the audiovisual staff.
Hi.
Hi. I would like to know. Is this working? Okay. I would like to know what do you think it was your biggest compromise when you do your first round of investment?
The biggest compromise when we did our first round of investment. I'll tell you, I think we got everything we wanted in the first round, just because we had people coming to us. It was a frenzy over the Series A. I'm trying to think if there's anything that we didn't really get in there. We didn't give away too many board seats. We didn't raise too much money. There's really nothing. I know your question is what's the biggest mistake to avoid initially, right? I'll tell you, we didn't do this, but the biggest mistake you can make is optimizing for price over the quality of the investors, right? If you're just I don't know, this guy's going to value my make-believe startup at $500,000 more, but they're kind of like a B-list investor as opposed to an A-list, that's a mistake. You got to find people that you want to work with. You got to find people who, when they call you, you want to answer the phone. You don't want to screen their calls. You got to find people that you're really excited about. And I think we lucked out. We found great people that we love to work with, but I've definitely heard horror stories from folks that have gone the other way, optimized for price or terms, and they ended up working with people that I don't think that they were psyched about. Is that okay answer? Yeah. Okay.
Over here.
I don't know. Do I?
Aquí. Hola, hola.
I don't know what to do.
If you guys can maybe even stand up, because I don't know if we can always see. Over here? Okay. Yeah.
La hago en español y tú se la traduces.
I guess if that's your
Yeah,
offer.
or I can do better in English. Okay, let's imagine some kind of sci-fi situation. You are right now with all the knowledge that you have from Foursquare, but you are going back to the future, let's say. You are going back 5 years. With all the knowledge that you have right now, which thing will you repeat exactly, like you did in the first year? And which thing you won't repeat ever if you have the chance to...
That's a really good question.
Okay.
All right, that actually is a really good question. I'll tell you what, I put all my notes in Evernote, and I have, I can't remember what I call the notebook in Evernote, but it's like lessons learned. And I write a lot of this stuff down where it's like, don't ever do that again. You know? Or like if I ever have to write like some blog post at the end of this thing, I can put all this stuff in there. What did we do that was right? I'll tell you, we hired really good people initially, and I think we got. This is such like an easy cop-out answer, but you know, like we hired all of our friends, people that were passionate about this, that got what we were doing. They weren't just like, I'm just trying to get to a hot startup. It's like, man, this, you know, they were people that we had worked with in the past. So a lot of folks from Google, a lot of folks we just knew from just doing stuff in New York, and it was all good people. It really helped the culture. They were all super smart. They were all very passionate, and we got that right. One thing I don't think that we did get right, and I'll tell you, this is the one thing that I would do over, is I have like a really grand vision for Foursquare, and it changes a lot, and I think that's okay. But I always keep it in my head. Like I don't like to write it down, because if you write it down and it changes, you have to go back and you have to change it in the paper, and like you know in Google Docs or something, and that's work. And I'm always like, it's not worth writing it down. But as you start to get big, and as you start to hire people, and like you can't talk to every single person all the time about what the vision is, like, they need to understand that stuff. And so I think earlier on, I would have on a big piece, on a big whiteboard, being like, this is what we are doing. This is why the company exists. Right? I know these answers in my head. I just don't talk about them all the time. These are the things that we're going to do to get there. And these are the things that we're not going to do to get there. And I wouldn't just like have it in my head, and I wouldn't write it down in the sticky, and I wouldn't put it in the Google Doc. I would write it on the wall, on a whiteboard, and change it as much as I want to. But it would be there so that everyone could see it. And so when you get in an argument like, well, I don't know, should we do this feature? It's like, nope, it says on the whiteboard, we are not doing that feature. Right? It's right up there. And I wish we did more of that. I'm fine with this. Is 4 years into Foursquare, and we're just getting to the point where we're doing lots of that. You know, like get company meetings, like stand up, like, hey, listen, I know we have 150 people here, but I'm going to tell you again why we are all at this company and what we are building and what we're not going to build. And I wish I was more diligent about that earlier on.
So Dennis, I have a question for you on launching. So you did some really interesting strategic stuff around South by to gain a lot of buzz, to get the press involved, and to gain some momentum. Tell us how did you plan? Because that's also part of the critical part of launching a startup is how do you strategize on launching, where to launch it, you know, what event, is Mobile World Congress a place to launch it, South by, et cetera? Would you change anything, or what recommendations do you have for other founders?
I think like we nailed it at South by Southwest 2009 in a way that I don't think you can do again. Right? It was just like the right time for that. We were like the only people that were launching stuff. It was when South by was more of like a like people that are really passionate about the internet as opposed to like a now it seems like it's like a big marketing social media conference. So people are always trying to do this. There's going to South by Southwest, this conference in Austin. I think it's next week maybe. I mean, there'll be 20 startups that launch there, 30 startups that launch there. And when you do that, like you just get lost in the noise. And people like you make noise for 10 minutes and then people go on to the next shiny new thing. You know, for advice on how to launch, we always, you know, we launch with our, what did we do? We launched with our friends first. We kind of kept it closed, but I'm a big fan of not like keeping your ideas really that secret. to go. Like we went to the New York Tech Meetup before we launched. This is an event that goes on in New York. It's like 600 people will show up. It's kind of the same format here. And we went on stage and we're like, we're going to launch, like we haven't launched, but we're going to launch this thing, and here's what it looks like, and we're going to launch it next week, and here's what we're going to do with it, and here's why we think it's interesting, and here's what we're going to do a couple months from now. Like we were very transparent about it. Like I know a lot of people like to, like be in stealth mode. Like I'm not going to tell you what we're doing next. I just don't see the point of that. Like I wanted to get. I remember this. Remember Emily asked me very, very specifically when we launched it at the New York Tech Meetup. Telling the story of what we wanted to do, because I wanted everyone in the room, not just to sign up, but I wanted them to be part of the story. It's like, we're going to do this thing. We tried to do it before and it failed. We're going to try it again. This is why it's going to work. This is why I want you to be excited about it. I want everyone in the room to give us feedback. But like, we tried to make it like it was almost like a group launch, right? And I don't even know if you can pull that off now, but that was the way that we tried to do it. Like, we didn't pretend we were a big company. It's like, we're just two guys working around a kitchen table, and we want you guys to be a part of what we're doing, and we want to make something really special. And we did this with Dodgeball too. Like, you get users involved in giving you feedback. You get them involved in giving you product direction. When you get a great idea and you launch a feature, like, you know what, that's a great idea. It's like, hey, we launched a feature and we did it because Sally said it was going to be a good idea, so we built it. Like, you give them a little bit of credit for it. And like, we have our whole super user community in Foursquare. Like, they edit and curate the database. Like, that's their handiwork. And I think people feel like a sense of pride and ownership over that. And I think that's one of the things that we've ended up doing right. So that's kind of not really an answer to your question. But as part of the launch, we try to keep it open. We try to get everyone involved. And we just acted like real people. Like, we didn't try to act like a company launching something. It's like, we're building something that we want people to use. And it seemed to have worked.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Well, two.
We'll do these two, because they both had their hands up, yeah.
Can you bring the mic over here afterwards?
After Foursquare, of course, what's the hottest startup out there right now?
The hottest startup out there right now. Define hot. Like what? Like the stuff that I really like. What do I like? Can we look at what's on my phone? I don't know. I play with so much stuff that I'm like blanking when he asked me this question. You know what? Like, I don't know. Can't name drop anything. I'll tell you what I do like, though. Like, you totally caught me off guard. You stumped me. I love the people that are. I'm a huge nerd for like quantified self stuff. I've got my my Nike Fuel. I've got my Upband. Like, I love the data the idea that we're all collecting data, and that somehow this data is going to intersect with my Foursquare check-ins, with my internet-connected scale, with the fork that measures what I'm eating, and the Google Glass that takes a picture of the calories I'm consuming. And somehow it's going to eventually tell me, it's like, if you eat that hamburger, you're going to feel like shit tomorrow because you have to get on a plane. Like, the intersection of all that stuff, I think, is really amazing. And like, if I wasn't doing this, I think I'd probably be playing in that space a little bit. But right now, like, we're contributing a lot of data that someone will get to play with there. So that I'm really psyched about a lot of that stuff. But and I think the other next step, and this is another cop-out answer, is like, like apps that you don't have to use, apps that are just like in your pocket, and like, I want to own that space. I want Foursquare to be like the app I want Foursquare to be the company that teaches people like, holy cow, that's a really good idea. And I think we have a really good shot at doing that. If you give us like another 6 months or so, I think you'll see a lot of that. So pay attention to that space.
Thanks a lot, Dennis. First of all, very inspiring. I really, really like your attitude, and that's a lot to learn from. I was thinking about scale, like how you moved from New York to other countries. I know you had the API, you mentioned that before, but how do you move from neighborhood to neighborhood, and if you could talk about that for location-based apps?
Yeah, actually, I think this is, we done, did I interrupt you?
No, yeah,
okay.
I'm done.
This is actually a good question to end on, and I think it's a really important question because I think it highlights the differences in U.S. startups versus European startups. And people say like, why don't European startups grow, like get the same type of scale that U.S. startups do? And I think one of the answers there is like my mindset when we launched this stuff in New York was like, we're going to launch this in New York, and then we're going to pick 3 cities, and then it's going to be U.S., and then it's going to be the rest of the world. and we just see it as like U.S. and the rest of the world. And like, you know, we took our time translating it into different languages, and you know, it was years before we reached out and tried to do like marketing in other countries. And we had the luxury of doing that because like the users just kind of crowdsource this thing on their own. You know, they were like, hey, can you please launch it in Canada? Can you please launch it in Spain? And it's like, well, eventually we'll get there, right? And then we just ended up flipping on the switch that just worked everywhere else. Sometimes I think European startups have like the country-by-country thing. It's like, we're going to make something for Spain, and then we're going to do it in the UK, and then we're going to do it in Germany. And it's like, well, that's a lot of steps. It should just be like, you know, get it working in your city, and then get it working everywhere else. And I think it's just a difference in mindset. And that might be totally naive, and you can call me out on it. But that's just the impression that I get from, you know, from traveling and talking to some folks. Bless you. Bless you. So, like, for scale for us, it just kind of happened. And I think it happened for us because we made it like a binary thing, like, you know, U.S. and rest of the world, as opposed to like picking markets and like really trying to strategize about going after it. I mean, we were just super scrappy. Like, we're trying to push this stuff out as quickly as possible. And like, I think about how we would handle this now as a company with 160 people. It'd be like, well, should we do Vancouver first or Japan? Like, we would take forever to do it now because we're like a company. But back then, it's like, I don't know, just turn it on. If it's broken, we'll turn it off. If it works, awesome, you know. And that was always our attitude. And you know, we definitely got into scaling woes. Like, we didn't go through all the drama that Twitter and Tumblr did. We got a little bit ahead of it. But you know, as they say, like, those are good problems to have, you know. So, and by the way, to the guy that was asking about the thing that you would go back and you know, if you could do anything over again, everyone would be like, oh, those are such good problems to have. If you ever have good problems to have, like, there are no good, those are bad problems. Those are the worst problems, right? Because they take forever to fix and they're usually really expensive. So it's funny, like, people in the outside world, like, oh, you're growing so fast and all the servers are crashing. Like, those are good problems to have. I'm like, those are never good problems to have. Those are the ones that keep you up all night long and drive you bananas. But I guess it is better to have them than not have them.
Okay, well, let's give him a round of applause because I think we've all done.
Thank you guys for having me. It's like, this is definitely like one of the highlights of my week. Like, I've been at Mobile World Congress and just running around from meeting to meeting. And the meetings are fun because like the operators and the handset manufacturers, like they love us in a way that like they love us a lot more than they loved us last year. So it's fun. But like, this is like one of my favorite things to do. So if you guys find yourself on the stage someday because like whatever you're working on blows up, like you got to like give it back to everyone here and like just help everyone else get to the next level. So,
all right,
cool.
Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it.